NDCs related to forestry in the region. So, out of the 183 NDCs submitted, 38 comes from the Asia-Pacific countries. High proportion of these prioritize forest-related actions for climate change mitigation. They are reaffirming, or many of them are reaffirming their plans for REDD+. And the cumulative impact of the NDC commitments is a substantial net sink by 2030. Let me explain this a little bit closer. So, if the NDCs would be achieved as they are currently committed, that would mean that there would be a 160% increase in the land-based carbon sinks, 88% of which from improved forest management. And this is the slide that looks at the carbon sinks and the carbon removals and the emission reductions. And here you can see the forest management is highlighted as blue, as it is really providing a majority of the carbon sinks. And the land-based emissions overall will continue to come mainly from the Southeast Asia through forest loss and biomass burning. It's interesting I hope you can see this picture, but it's interesting to see that in the LULUCF alone, under a baseline scenario, the annual greenhouse gas removals in Asia are expected to be 0.86 gigatons in 2030, and that would be 25% more than reported in 2015. So significant increase. Under the NDC mitigation scenario, however, the cumulative impact of the LULUCF mitigation contribution in Asia is a sink of 2.2 gigatons in 2030, which is a 160% increase in annual greenhouse gas removals compared to the scenario without NDCs. So here, a little bit about the adaptation. 22 out of 25 countries include forestry and adaptation commitments, including 8 Pacific countries. 14 countries in the region, including sustainable forest management and reduced forest degradation in their adaptation commitments. And afforestation, fire management, reduced deforestation and biodiversity management are also key adaptation commitments in the region. And I am sure that the panel will also discuss this further. There is a big but to these commitments, like in many other regions in the world. So up to 70% of these NDC commitments in the Asia-Pacific are dependent on international finance. But only 8 countries specify financial needs in their NDCs implementation in Asia, requiring $1.6 billion, as they have currently put in their NDCs. And there are also more and more promising scenarios and facilities that contribute to the financing. You are well aware of the Green Climate Fund possibilities, which I'm sure Janie will highlight us further, in particular the REDD+ results-based payment pilot program. And it's interesting to see also that there are more than 50 full-size projects in Asia-Pacific that have been approved, and 25% of them include one way or another forestry aspects. So I mentioned already the results-based payment pilot. Currently the GCF has committed 500 million or has been approved 500 million to use for this pilot. And again, Janie, I'm sure, will highlight more details on this. And then now obviously, as you well know, as negotiators, there is negotiations ongoing. And this COP on the Article 6 on the compliance carbon markets. And there are new opportunities of offsetting markets, which are currently already under discussion. One of the perhaps most known one is the Civil Aviation Organizations Initiative in Corsia. So a few words in the what needs to be done more in the NDCs for enable to raise the ambition, but also in the future obviously to start implementing them. So what the study was finding that there's a clear need to develop investment plans and timelines for implementation. So that is the next step very, very physically, because currently these in many countries still are just the commitments that have been given. In many countries this work is going on and being lifted up as priority. And also in many countries there's a need to complete information on greenhouse gas sources and sinks from forests. And also there are many countries that are interested in looking further how to measure and how they can put forest degradation as part of their NDC. And there is obviously in many countries a need to revisit and update the NDCs with improved data and enabling conditions for REDD+ implementations, including attentions to the policy, governance, institutions and tenure in particular. And also the intersectoral and cross-sectoral linkages, in particular in those areas where agriculture expansion is a main driver of deforestation. And something that has started in a number of countries is the development of climate investment registries that have to be in place before able to tap on the financing opportunities. And then also developing the impact monitoring frameworks in addition to the monitoring frameworks of the greenhouse emissions. Then just, this is my last slide, but a few words what FAO is doing to support the countries and the regions. So we are working in a number of countries to moving the REDD+ readiness towards REDD+ implementation, and in a few countries also work with the countries as they've requested us to accompany them being potentially in the future an accredited entity for the results-based payment pilot. There is a recently approved full proposal of the GCF in Nepal, and there is work going on also in a number of countries. Here is just listed Myanmar and PNG, but there's also other countries in the regions that have, a number of them have readiness projects already approved. So we also in FAO continue our normative work and produce guidelines, reviews and studies basically from the National Forest Monitoring Team in the Forestry Department. We have a set of tools and platforms that are very modern and easy to use, that can provide easy, free access to satellite imagery. And also they are open source, they are freely available, and they are very easy to use. Nowadays you can use them from your mobile phone. And they provide an access to the supercomputers to do very complex calculations in a really faster than ever before. Then I also want to mention a Global Forest Resources Assessment that is the official United Nations statistics on forests. There's every 5 years that the Global Forest Resources Assessment provides its main report, and the next one is coming next June. We will publish already the key highlights in April 2020. And then FAO is a member also of the Global Forest Observation Initiative, which is a partnership of a number of entities that are trying to harmonize and support further countries in their efforts on using, accessing, using remote sensing. And then we are assisting country efforts to measure and monitor the forest sector's contributions to the climate change goals, and also assess the success of measures to implement NDCs and ensure consistency. Consistency in time, and on consistency, sort of a harmonization also among the countries, if that's possible. So that was just a quick highlight of what FAO is doing and what was happening overall in the region in NDCs. I'm pretty sure Daniel will give much more deeper insights to this topic, as he's much more familiar than I am. So I will actually start my PowerPoint here. And, okay, my chair disappeared. I had a chair next to the panel, but never mind. It doesn't. It's okay. I will be on this side. So what I would like to do, I would like to start just having some remarks on this topic of the NDCs, NDC implementation, ambition from your perspective, what you are doing in your institutions. And I would like to start with Belinda from the ministry, in particular as you are working on data, you perhaps highlight some experience from Indonesia in this regard. And also I know Indonesia is working with a number of other countries already sharing what they have been doing, and there has been a lot of South-South collaboration also between Indonesia and other countries in the region. So Belinda, please.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. So actually, I would like to answer the question that just raised by Tina, but maybe there will be, actually for this, hello? Oh, I don't think I need this one. I did prepare a presentation, but actually it's not really to answer the question. But in principle, Tina raised the question about what will be the role of Indonesia so far in the NDC, and specifically since I'm working for the try to guarantee the data and information available in Indonesia. So I think in the past, when we start dealing with the climate change and so on, I think the challenge is how to make the data ready, how to make the data available, and how to make all the data become information that can be used. But nowadays, since the issue is going further and deeper, I think the guarantee about the data availability is not the only issues, but how to improve the accuracy of the information. That is becoming more critical. So it's not in how to prepare the data, but it's only how to make the data even better than we have before. Of course, the challenge is related to how to make it consistent, because I think if we deal with the monitoring system, the issue of having consistency for the long period monitoring system is also the important thing. That's one of the issue I would like to highlight in order to raise the ambition by Indonesia. But in line what I just say related to the issue of raise the ambition, I probably would like also to say something about the role of forestry in Indonesian NDC. I don't think I need to explain this one, but I just want to highlight that there are some complexity for Indonesia because we have a very huge country that actually, if we count also our sea, that will be the same size of the United States, I think, from the East Coast to West Coast. But of course, we have some island in between. But I think there will be more complexity because the condition between this island, and also the other one, it's the Papua one. It's rather very diverse. So there will be a big challenge in this situation. And also that we have about 14.9 million of the peat, and peat is also a big issue when we deal with the climate change, because peat can give emission if they have some change on the peat itself. This is our NDC. I don't think I need to explain, but I just want to highlight there are 5 sectors that actually Indonesia tried to give for. But among these 5 sectors, actually forestry has been expected to contribute the most. So in your presentation, Tina said that it is more than 78% of the country also put for forestry, but even in Indonesia, forestry is giving the most contribution for our NDC. So this is actually very serious for us. So if we want to to achieve our commitment to get 26% up to 40%, so meaning that we have to really maintain our forestry sector to really give a lot of contribution in our NDC. So following the NDC that I mentioned in the previous presentation, actually there are 4 things. I think that is quite famous. Many people know about this one. But the first is about reducing the deforestation. So I think when we want to have more contribution from the forestry sector, reduce the deforestation will be the main important thing. And then the second is about improve the implementation of sustainable forest management principle, both in the natural and in the plantation. The fourth is about rehabilitation, because following the data that we have so far, we have also unproductive land that actually can be benefit by having the rehabilitation of that. But you know that to achieve those 12 million target for Indonesia is also a big homework, a big work for that. And also the fourth is about the restoration of 2 million hectares of peat in 2030 with a success rate of 90%. That's a huge one. And additional effort, Indonesia also to really maintain the forest and land fire management is included in this one. So if this is the 4 forestry sector action program for NDC mitigation, there will be also including managing the forest and land fire. So this is there are some government policies on reducing the deforestation. Those are including the NDC that I just mentioned about. There are 4 main things. And actually there is also, since I came from the Directorate General of Forest Planology, we also responsible to have the National Forestry Plan. We already have the National Forestry Plan from for 2011 up to 2030. There are some focus categorization on the forest utilization that actually already defined in the National Forestry Plan. And those 2 I try to highlight because it's really related to what I'm in charge for. The first is about continuing the moratorium of new license on primary and peat forest policy. Actually, people are more familiar call it moratorium, but nowadays we change the name, not the moratorium anymore, because we not do the moratorium, but there's already some termination. We try to stop to giving new permit on specific area that actually we consider it should be contribute more for the protection and conservation. And there is also some continuation in implementing the One Map policy. What I mean here, in the beginning of my presentation, if we want to raise the ambition, it's not only providing the information, but it's also giving the good quality and the good management of the data itself. So that is also one of the target of Indonesia. There are some also related to the, this is the regulation, try to give restriction of forest land conversion for unproductive convertible production. So meaning that we focus only on the unproductive land to give the new permit. And there are also some regulation related to it's only oil palm produced from non-forest land or non-productive land that will be granted the certificate. There is a combating forest and land fire. There are some change in the policy itself. The establishment of DG of Forest and Environment Law Enforcement. In the past, we don't have specific arrangement for law enforcement. Nowadays, we have specific DG that focus on the law enforcement. This is one of the effort that actually made by the government of Indonesia to really focus on that, and also try to push the policy of forestry program. So it's like the idea of having people also get involved in the forestry and forestry management, and also the certification, the one that is quite famous too, and also the participatory assessment mechanism of forest area boundary. So there are some of the government policy has been established. There are some that's really related to my responsibility, the blue one, but there are some is also the one that maybe people need to know, because sometimes maybe it's not really well, known about the information. About the moratorium itself, maybe it's better for me to maybe later on to answer some questions. But yeah, and this is just the explanation. So I don't want to add too much, but having a very short explanation, I just want to highlight that the Indonesian ambition to really put the forestry on the front line of the NDC is also try to provide data and information in a good quality, in a good way in managing the data and information, so that if there are some mechanism, some international mechanism that they need a good quality of the data and information, we can also be part of it. Having said that, I don't think I need to say something more, so I would like to end my presentation and will be more than happy to answer the question later on. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Belinda. And if there is any sort of a burning question to Belinda right now, please raise your hand. And if not, we will have some time at the end of these presentations to have a little more dialogue and questions. But any particular questions to Belinda? Not at this stage, so may I ask, the next speaker is Daniel, and from Daniel's very, very long experience on this area and forestry overall, so to have a presentation, let me take my papers here. Daniel, please.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Once again, my name is Daniel Murdiarso. I am with C4. I've been working on, as I said earlier, wetland, namely peatland and mangrove in the past 8-10 years. And today I would like to share with you in the theme that FAO has been kindly inviting me to share what happened in the region on the forestry issues and how it is going to be uploaded in the NDC processes. And I would like to make very specific emphasis on the issue of blue carbon. And this is blue COP, supposed to be blue COP in Santiago, and people talking a lot about ocean, and I don't swim, so I'm only talking about the coastal zone. So that's what blue carbon ecosystem is. It was coined about 10 years ago, and people trying to understand the dynamic and amount of carbon stored in this ecosystem, namely seagrass, salt marsh, and mangrove. So blue carbon ecosystem has been known for quite some time, and we try to bring this into the climate agenda, and by putting carbon, it is quite timely to describe about the role of blue carbon in climate change mitigation and adaptation. That's exactly what NDC is talking about. So in the NDC right now, I mentioned about 180 countries. It is a very old data, 170 countries. When we adopted this number from UN Environment, out of 170 countries mentioned blue carbon, 28 of them on the mitigation aspect. And more than that, almost bubble is mentioning the role of blue carbon in adaptation. So this is very encouraging. I believe we need to help countries to encourage them to put forward the very important ecosystem, very rich in carbon, I will tell you later, in the NDC processes for both mitigation as well as adaptation. So, oops. I missed very important slide. Why it's not coming as, okay, anyway. So the previous slide, which is supposed to be animated, telling us about the amount of carbon in the region, in the Asia Pacific, which is about almost 4 billion tons in the blue carbon ecosystem. Not only that, why this ecosystem is so important, because the burial rate, the carbon burial rate is 20 times higher than any terrestrial forest. So those 3 billion tons only covering about maybe less than 6% of the entire forest in the region. But the amount of carbon is so much, and it's very tiny, forest in the coastal zone. And that's why this carbon-rich ecosystem is very important. Yes, this is Haruni, the star. So when we are talking about 3 billion tons, especially if you look at the traffic in Jakarta, the emission caused by destructing a mangrove is around 190 million tons. That is about 40 million cars in the road. So if we manage to halt or to stop, to slow down the deforestation of mangrove, that amount of carbon can be saved, equal to 40 million emission from 40 million cars. So that's very crucial in terms of mitigation. Now, what about the role in adaptation? Because as you know, NDC entertain these two things equally, mitigation and adaptation. This is the report from the Global Commission on Adaptation, chaired by Ban Ki-moon, the former UN Secretary General, which described that if you invest on adaptation as much as 1.8 trillion in the next 10 years, we're looking at 10 years horizon here, the outcome, the product or the result of it is almost 7 trillion US dollar. And among those action that is recommended by the Commission is working on mangrove. So why is that? It's very interesting. So adaptation is something that's been left behind for so many years, and in the NDC it is entertained equally. And it's very important to take into account the role of coastal forests, namely salt marsh, seagrass, and mangrove into the equation of the NDC. So by two things. One is restoring the degraded mangrove. We have a lot in Indonesia, and almost half of the previous mangrove is degraded, and also conserving the existing ones. So with that, a lot of people will be protected from flooding and other disasters due to current high sea level, etc. So that number has been monetized, and the net present value of coastal forests globally is about 90,000 per year. So I stop there, and if it is compared with what people are trying to get from, for example, oil palm, it is only 4,000, 6,000 US dollar. Mangrove can generate 90,000. If you protect the hotels, protect the ecotourism area, protect the all the infrastructure on the coastline, big cities are protected. That's the value of having mangrove intact when you are talking about adaptation. Sea level rise is something else. And it is also benefited by local community, fishing community. The dollar value is very staggering when you're talking about fish catch. The provision of nutrition, health, etc. So this is very important for the local. And this perspective is very interesting when you are implementing NDC or any kind of climate project involving coastal community. Of course, the degraded mangrove is quite challenging, but a number of effort has been tested to look at how aquaculture can be run in that kind of situation. Having mangrove at the same time to run the fishing, aquaculture. So this is some of the options that have been implemented in many countries in the Pacific, Asia-Pacific region, including the Philippines, Vietnam, and Indonesia. Ecotourism, you can have this very charismatic species there if you have mangrove. If you don't have mangrove, these species won't stop there to feed because they are migratory species, and while they are there, you can send to people living in the cities. This is the time for the attraction of having very strange bird, spoonbill, and those kind of stuff you never had in places like Vietnam or Indonesia, but they are traveling and stop by to eat, and here you are, the attraction, and it can generate money. Right, so again, tidal marsh, mangrove, and seagrass are very, very valuable to have and to protect. And we just had a publication about the value of this ecosystem. And we want to generate more and verify the numbers. Since about, as I said earlier, 90,000 per year you can generate from mangrove. Why Asia Pacific? If you look at this figure, the yellow lines is mainly the mangrove is in Asia Pacific region and also seagrass. So basically the region is the capital of blue carbon. So if you're working with people in the coastal zone, you're working with government and run the NDC project, NDC target, this is the place where carbon-rich ecosystem can be put up in the agenda. It's very important to build the capacity of government, scientists, how to assess those assets, how to develop the regulation and arrange the situation with the local government, etc. So we ran a workshop last July in Hanoi, and my colleague also ran the same workshop in Mexico a month later. So we've been covering a lot of countries. In Asia Pacific, we cover 13 countries and involving a number of scientists, experts from all over the world to look at potential of using blue carbon in the NDC and achieve Paris target. So how we do it? Well, a few years back, the methodology has been established and developed and used and tested and also propagated by the IPCC. And Chapter 4 of the IPCC guideline called 2013 Wetland Supplement, specifically talking about mangrove, about coastal wetland, about blue carbon ecosystem. So the tool is there. So it's a matter of how to familiarize with this tool in the reporting of the NDC, etc. If we compare the current reporting, be it national communication, BUR, or any other, including the NDC, most countries using the old 2006 IPCC guideline, of which mangrove, seagrass, and salt marsh were considered as AFOLU, part of the AFOLU document. But if you look at the new direction, or perhaps this is the possible roadmap how to use the existing or the new guideline, wetland is specifically mentioned and addressed, and the guideline is there. So one can start generating emission factor activity data to have fine-tune and include blue carbon or wetland ecosystem in the NDC processes. So with that high carbon content, 3 to 5 times higher than terrestrial forest, hopefully raising the ambition, enhancing the ambition of NDC using peatland and mangrove would be the direction that the government will consider. Right, so the current NDC or INDC, as I said, mainly using 2006 guideline. So Indonesia is among countries who are going to start using wetland supplement 2013 this year, so that at the end of 2020, the new NDC, the next round of NDC, will be using, hopefully, will be using wetland supplement to report. So along the same line, all this reporting hopefully will be using the same guideline where wetland, peatland, and mangrove are considered. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Daniel. So any questions particularly to Daniel at this point? Please go ahead and introduce yourself. There's a microphone coming from your back.
My name is Ian Lumley from Ireland, where we destroyed our native ancient forests back in the 17th century to build ships, mainly for Britain. So we were left with nothing. We actually wiped out our entire native forest. A few fragments were left in valleys. Now, I'm here affiliated to the Global Forest Coalition, but I'm also a member of the Irish Peat Society, which is affiliated to the International Peat Society. So as you've quite brilliantly communicated, the Indonesian forests are not just one of the world's greatest resources of biodiversity and carbon, but in addition, the peat soils on which they rest represent an enormous carbon store, which if released will be catastrophic. Now, I acknowledge that the figures of deforestation in Indonesia, internationally validated data, do show a dramatic decline on the situation that prevailed in the 1990s and at the beginning of this century, when there was over a million hectares annually were being forested. But still, the figure is still frightening. I mean, I just have Indonesian government validated data in front of me, and it's 440,000 hectares in 2018, and that's only just a reduction of 480,000 in 2017. So, we shouldn't even be talking about continued deforestation at this stage. The situation is so bad we should be talking about restoration, which we're talking about in my country now. One of our great priorities is can we now focus on restoring the native forests that we lost those centuries ago? We're at a knife-edge tipping point situation. So what I'm really asking is, I've been hearing for years about these. I've been at the last 5 COPs now and following forestry, and we've been hearing about NDCs and offsetting and international effort to support Indonesia and Brazil and other countries that are, because what's happening in Indonesia is clearly of concern to all of us. But coming from the developed world, to what degree are we causing the pressures of forest products and palm oil that is causing this continued problem? And to what degree can we mobilize support and action to help in Indonesia to reverse this situation? So we actually bring about a situation that Indonesia is gaining credit for reforestation projects once we stop this continued annual degradation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I think there was a quite large question, perhaps more to Belinda, but also to Danielle. May I just suggest that we park that, because I think they might want to think about a little bit the answer to that. And we hear the presentation and the views from the Green Climate Fund Secretariat, and then I've noted down your questions, so we will get back to that. So may I now ask Janie to provide some insights to the GCF.
Hello everyone, good morning. Thank you very much for inviting the Green Climate Fund to this event. So I'm pleased to come in last so I can react a little bit on the excellent presentation from the previous speaker, giving good background on Indonesia and the region. So I won't go into a lot, the presentation actually that I've prepared because we're a little bit running out of time. But what I want to mention is that we just went through a replenishment this year at the GCF. So we got generous contributions from donors, 9.8 billion for the next 4 years. So we are really looking forward to work with countries and implementing their NDC, implementing some of these opportunities for climate actions that have been mentioned. So I would really look forward to work with Indonesia, for example, on a blue carbon project, another one on restoring peatlands. Some other concrete ideas were mentioned, but I think these two seems to be very high impact in terms of mitigation benefits, also adaptation benefits. So I think this is two projects that we could really start discussing with partners, with FAO, other partners that are working closely with Indonesia on those topics. We have at the GCF a range of results areas, but one is dedicated to forest and land use, and then we have several on adaptation, most vulnerable communities, food and water security, resilient infrastructure. So could be very could result into cross-cutting projects, which both mitigation and adaptation would be acknowledged. We have also a range of financing instruments, so grant, loans for 20 or 40 years. If we're talking about the public sector, we have as well equity with the private sector, we have guarantee. And we have both the capacity to interact with public sector or private sector, so we have a dedicated as well private sector facility. So I think these opportunities have been also, it's been probably into the NDC of Indonesia and other climate strategies. So I think now, as we're saying, it's time for action. I think let's take this opportunity of entering into these new 4 years of replenishment to seeing what's needed to really bring these climate intervention, at scale. So what's needed really to go on restoring peatland or blue carbon mangroves. We have already similar projects in the pipeline. We have a project with India, which is all about that, restoring coastal areas, mangrove, seagrass, coral reef, and salt marsh, as well as resilient livelihood like aquaculture and agriculture associated with these restoration activities. So you could check it out on our website. So the funding proposal is available. The project has started recently. We have also other project in Asia. Recently, there was a project in Laos, which I said had got approved, which is all about forest conservation, forest restoration, as well as the linkages with agriculture, improving agricultural productivity, and limiting deforestation. We had another one, as Tina was mentioning, also in Nepal with FAO that just got approved as well. We have one with ADB in Cambodia, also looking at value chain and bringing in biogas for also reducing deforestation. So we have a lot of examples in the pipeline portfolio, and I think now it's a good time for the next programming. So we are we also in terms of planning or capacity building. So we have readiness funds, which can be accessed by countries. These are like 1 million per country per year, and that could be used for these intersectoral discussion that need to happen, studies or capacity building. And then we have also project preparation funds that are available if countries needs to prepare good high quality projects. And then of course the financing of the projects themselves. That would depend on the project, on the financing. But for example, the India projects on coastal restorations and mangroves, which was really at scale in 3 states of India, was 40 million in GCF financing and 100 million in co-financing. So you see the scale could really have an impact on climate and adaptation mitigation benefits for Indonesia. And we do hope these actions would then result, from the NDC, results into also the future reporting and as part of the national GHG inventory. So I think I'll stop here to allow some time for discussion and questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Janie, and hearing also the good news of the replenishment, so thank you for sharing that. I know that Janie is a bit of short in time to another event she has to attend. So again, if you have any particular questions related to Green Climate Fund opportunities in the Asia Pacific region. Okay, all very clear and good news shared, and also a good pipeline of projects, also the project already approved, but also pipeline coming up. And I think also the opportunities that you highlighted, including also the ones that Daniel mentioned on the peatlands restoration and mangroves restoration, in addition to, of course, RED and other things that are there. So, is there any other questions from the audience right now to the panelists or the topic? That would be a good time to start that dialogue now. We have about 10 minutes for that. Please go ahead. Please tell your name.
It's Julie Mullins, and I work at the Center for International Forestry Research, writing and editing. And there was a presentation the other day, and there was a discussion about which countries have included peatlands in their NDCs, and somebody said only 7 countries had actually included them, and from FAO actually, and I just wondered if anyone had any comments on that, like about challenges.
Okay, maybe that would be to Danielle, I think, but let's see if there are any other questions. Any other questions? Okay, well, let's start the questions that we have heard so far. So there was the first question, quite challenging question, and I would like, this was about the, basically that to what degree a developed world is causing deforestation in Indonesia, could be perhaps overall, but in Indonesia, and what should be done about that. So from your perspectives, Belinda and Danielle, perhaps you can just highlight some of the responses. Danielle?
Let me take up the question first, and then Belinda can add on the statistic. Well, whether or not other countries causing the pressure, I can tell from the blue carbon perspective, the deforestation of mangrove, mainly for aquaculture. If you look at the eastern coast of Thailand, Vietnam, northern coast of Indonesia and Sumatra and Java, they are all producing shrimp and fish. And it's not necessarily consumed locally, and it's still a connection between fish and shrimp production in this region with the tourism somewhere else, including in Europe. So if you look at the label of those stuff, which is eaten in the tourist area on the coastal zone, southern France, wherever, it's basically a tropical product. Causing? Maybe yes, but this country also need to generate money, small or big, but like any other product, they are now putting a number of criteria in terms of to meet the sustainability requirement, including where the shrimp is raised, how much mangrove is being deforested. So there are a number of projects now trying to make the less or smaller carbon footprint in producing shrimp. So this kind of legal, what do you call it, regulation imposed to the producer will encourage the sustainability production, but also increase the price, I believe. About the peatland, I can explain more about the number of countries mentioning mangrove in the NDC, because if you look at the map I show you, most of these countries having coast. Very few landlocked, of course, they don't have coast, and the way it is mentioned is not directly blue carbon, just coastal ecosystem, the importance of coastal forests and those kind of stuff, and then it's thick, yes, it is blue carbon related, it is mangrove related, etc. So that's how the numbers come up. On peatland, I think it's less country having housing peat in their countries. That's why the number is relatively small. There was the description from Marshall about the number of countries mentioning from FAO. Yeah, much less than mangrove.
Okay, pass to Belinda for the first question.
Thank you, Ian, for the question. I think you are also as worried as myself. Yes, it is true that even though you know that the last 3 years the deforestation rate in Indonesia is decreased significantly, even though we have not yet reached like zero deforestation. It's a bit difficult because sometimes the country still also needs some development in the country itself. But I think if we try to check with the NDC itself, as you may aware at the beginning, that Indonesia tried to put the forestry as the most important sector in the NDC, and we use the red mechanism to really try to get the benefit from the forestry. And you know, under the red plus itself, the country also make the baseline, the one that we try to have like the baseline, the average that we can still accept it. You know that the number is about 920 million hectare per year. So that is the baseline. If we can have less than that, there will be a good example for us. And as you mentioned about the last year, so from 2017 to 2018, we have like 440,000 deforestation. It's below the baseline already, even though maybe some people are not really happy because still, you know, still there are some area been deforested. But it is really true that the government really put the effort, a huge effort in such a way that we can continue to reduce the deforestation. There are some degree that we still can accept the deforestation sometimes because the country still developed, as I mentioned about. The number should be really below the target that we have under the NDC, because under the NDC we still can have like 450,000 until 325,000 million actually is in the NDC. It does not mean that we will keep it that way. Of course, we try to reduce under that number as well, but at least that is the number that actually we can still accept so far until 2030. But there are, I mean, if there are so many institutions that actually would like to work with Indonesia. As I mentioned before, I think now the issue is not only about providing the data and information, because I think that is the front line to know what's going on, to know what is already happening. We really need to know the information about the situation itself. So for the time being, we already have the data, but I think the challenge is how to improve the quality of the data, because there are always a question about how accurate you can trust your data. So we try to really reduce the uncertainty of the data itself. Is already part of the effort made by the Indonesia. There are so many government policy, as already mentioned. Maybe you missed my presentation, but there are some that is including the moratorium, you know, under the MOU between the Indonesia and Norway. There is also the moratorium. It was called moratorium because it's just the moratorium of the new permit, but now it's becoming the termination of the new permit. So we will not give any new license on that specific area. So that specific area, and that is about 66 million hectare, is dedicated to really for the protection and the conservation. So beside the forest land use of the forest function that we already have, so we put also some additional protection to that specific land that can be only used for the protection and the conservation. So there are a lot. We can have some further discussion on that, and I will be really happy to really answer. But there are some information that actually you can access in our website. I think at the end of my presentation there is some web information that actually can be used for further information. I think that is the additional information I would like to add. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we are basically at the end of this event, and I just wanted to have a couple of take-home messages that I heard that you were saying. So obviously you also pretty much repeated the main message as you were presenting, that indeed it's for the forestry community very important to hear and good to hear that Indonesia has really put a lot of importance of forestry and decreasing deforestation in the NDC, that it's the forestry is your major, most important sector there. You emphasized also that there is a lot of data. That's true in many other countries as well in the region and globally, but really the issue is now to improve the quality of that, improve the accuracy, and it also increase the transparency of the reporting. And then I think from Daniel, Daniel, you are the world's spokesperson to blue carbon, so who is not convinced that blue carbon is something that we really need to pay more attention to that? I think you made it very, very clear. So, and also that, the huge amount of carbon that it is in the seagrass, mangroves, and sea marshes. So that's important, that also not only for mitigation adaptation purposes, but also the livelihoods purposes. You mentioned also the ecotourism, aquaculture, and so forth. So really the really perspective that perhaps hasn't been given due attention yet. And from the GCF, Janie, thank you once again for highlighting the opportunities of the GCF, and in particular the good news of the replenishment. I think it was, you mentioned $9.8 billion, so that's a good, promising news. And given that the NDC really well, basically the update process continues now, and then when the real implementation starts, there's a good, promising also funding sources from the public sector through the Green Climate Fund. So what I would like to do is just to thank you all our panelists now, and let us give them a good applause for their presentation. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Tina Fanen, and also for all the distinguished guests, distinguished speakers. Now we have a token of appreciation from the Minister of Environment and Forestry. And I would like to ask for Mr. Adi to give it out to the moderators and also the speakers.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
And I would like to invite to all of the speakers and moderator to take a photo session. So please gather to the center of the stage. Thank you very much for the fascinating session, and also for the update for our collaborative agenda in forestry. And that concludes our session today about forestry in NDC and Asia Pacific perspective. We will take a short break of 10 minutes, and at 10:20 we are going to begin the next session of managing the remaining forest ecosystem in state forest land. So for you who are interested on the next session, please gather here in 10 minutes. And there's also a souvenir and also refreshment outside. You can take it and you can come back to our pavilion if you are going to attend the managing the remaining forest ecosystem beyond state forest land. Thank you.